Hi, Dr. Versalotti here, and in this screencast, it serves to kind of summarize how we are going to be evaluating assessments in the course. So the four main principles or qualities of assessment: validity, reliability, practicality, and beneficial consequences. We're going to focus on these four. Validity is complex, and authors talk about it in lots of different ways, but in this course we're going to focus on content-related validity when we evaluate our assessments. Why? Well, we really, as we evaluate assessments one at a time, we won't be able to have the information for criterion related, and construct related is more theoretical. And I would argue that the other two are not even validity, but we'll talk about those later. So let's focus on content related validity. Indirect testing certainly should match the learning objectives, but direct testing is more like the terminal goal, the ultimate goal of learning, right? Using the language in the real world. So in order, when we are evaluating assessments on a scale from 1 to 5, in order to be highly valid, the assessment must require the learner to perform the skill as needed in the real world, or as, mimicking that. So we want to consider both indirect testing. Does it have content related validity matching the learning objectives? And that might get us maybe halfway, but to be highly valid in our rating scale, we're going to want that to also be direct testing. Now, again, for reliability, there's lots of sources of threats to reliability, lots of variation that's possible in testing, right? Students could have a bad day, lots of things about noise and lighting and everything. But let's focus on what we, in our assessment, can control. And we're going to, of course, we want to do all that we can to have student-related and test administration reliability. But when we're looking at evaluating the assessments that we create, I'm going to assume that each student has a cleanly copied test sheet, and the audible or the visual is clear, and the lighting and the temperature and the noise are all the same. So we're going to focus on the reliability of rater reliability, both inter-rater reliability, but also intra-rater, maybe a little more focus there, because most of the time in our classroom assessments, we're the only rater. So we want to focus on if we ourselves will be consistent and reliable as we score. And I also want to consider test reliability when I'm evaluating the assessments. This is true for objective tests because some test items could be cultural or biased for certain speakers, but it's even more so with subjective assessments. So if we're giving a subjective assessment, the reliability is just going to be lower. What about practicality? Now, practicality is the resources needed versus the resources available. But again, it can get very complicated. Like, do we have the money to buy a certain test? Do we have the money to photocopy? I'm going to assume in most school districts, you will be able to photocopy tests and things like that. So we want to focus on what's relevant in this particular teaching context. And often that comes down to time and effort to create and to administer and grade the assessment for the instructor, the time it takes for the students, and maybe any others. So that's what we want to focus on when we evaluate practicality in this course. I also want to clarify that this is important to think that when we evaluate the practicality of the assessment, that does not include whether we think that it's worth it. If an assessment is worth it, despite the time and the effort that it takes, that will be considered in another principle, likely validity or beneficial consequences. But if something is very time intensive, that will definitely lower the practicality, whether it's worth it or not. Practicality is really about the resources, which for most teachers, time and effort is the most valuable resource. Moving on to beneficial consequences, there are two main ways to increase beneficial consequence. One is feedback. Individual feedback is can be very powerful. Group feedback can be very powerful. And the other main source of beneficial consequences is washback. This might be called consequential or the impact of the assessment. And we're going to focus specifically on positive washback. If I know I'm going to be assessed on these vocabulary words, I'm going to study those vocabulary words. So knowing what I'm going to be assessed on and how is going to have a positive effect on my performance. We can also think about authenticity and face validity as part of this, right? If students feel like it's a meaningful and a useful assessment, it's probably going to be more beneficial. Learners are probably going to feel better about taking it seriously, and they are going to take the results of it more seriously. So I would put those more in beneficial consequences. So in this course, when we evaluate assessments, we're going to evaluate validity, reliability, practicality, and beneficial consequences separately on a scale of 1 to 5. And it's going to be a way to evaluate maybe how we might improve those certain features of the assessment to increase them, and overall, more importantly, we're going to consider whether our portfolio, our set of assessments are balanced in these qualities. No assessment will be high on all of these, and that's totally expected. But the question is the balance of these 4 principles strong in a particular teaching context?